So for me, what I was absolutely convinced was that the child has to be a designer of the journey. That was a given. I mean, for most education, children are incidental. Their voices are incidental to the learning program, right? They never have a say. And coming from a design background, I would attribute a lot of that education to fundamentally reach the user and get the user into this journey.
Hi. So today we are joined by the brilliant Kiran Bir Sethi. She is a design graduate from the National Institute of Design, turned education reformer and social entrepreneur. She is also the founder of the Riverside School, where I had the privilege to graduate from, and of Design for Change and AProCh. She is a published author and a recipient of several international accolades. And without further ado, let's just get into the podcast. So the intention of this podcast is that we want to spread awareness around education and the problems faced by its various stakeholders, such as students, parents, and teachers, all in an effort to sort of create a learning resource for said stakeholders so that we can systematically work to solve problems and take education further. So I'm just going to dive right into the first question. So as I recall, you started venturing into the education space from the perspective of a concerned parent. And it would be great if you could take a moment and share the story involving a couple of crows with our audience on this podcast and just diverge into what concerned you back then.
God, it's so long back. But I think, as a parent, you're the first thing, and especially when you're young, and you have these dreams, etc., you basically believe that your child is special, and every parent thinks your child is special, and they would make this, and that everybody will love them the way you do. So not true. But I encountered not just the lack of love, but the complete disregard for human potential. And I think. And I believe that moment, which there were several, but the two that really stood out was, of course, I've shared this so many times, but it was Rag coming home one day, having done some essay on the cow, and he had this big red mark, this wonderful red weapon that teachers often carry across his notebook, and he just had no idea why. He had absolutely no understanding of what was wrong with what he had written. And apparently what transpired was that the teacher had written the points of the cow. The cow is an animal, cow has 4 legs, cow has a tail, etc. on the board. And he wasn't even being very creative. All he did, unfortunately, was put point number 3 as point number 2. That's all. And I believe he was sitting quite far from the board. There were 60 children in the class in an all-boys school. And for that, it was a big crime. And for that, it was a red mark. And we don't understand how these marks really affect children's minds, right? And at that point, the teacher must have just casually just put the red stroke and said, it's 0, whatever. And that was just my first introduction to what the rest of his 15 years were going to be. And that was just not good enough. The second, of course, was more telling. Again, at age 6 or 5.5 or whatever he was in K2 or something. And they had exams then, which is just unheard of. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that's a whole different story. But I go to pick up his report card, and I'm third in the line where the rest of the mothers are there. Super enthu mothers, okay, all holding on to their sons. And I was third, and Rag was holding my hand. And I remember the one who was right at the start was receiving this report card of this child, all of 5.5. Now, the one behind her can't really manage her own business. She peeps over to see what grade this other kid gets. And if that's not bad enough, when she goes to receive the child's report card, I don't know what was on that paper, but she turns around and gives her son a slap right there. And I remember Rag's hand literally shivering in my hand. Look at what's happening. A child is witnessing what failure and success and good and bad is with these little actions, and they don't know what that means. And I didn't even bother to pick up the report card. I just took him and I walked out, and remember calling up Geet and said, I'm starting a school. Poor guy, I don't know what he did. He just said, what happened? I said, no, I'm starting a school. This is not happening. This cannot be done. So I think as a mother, I reacted to the complete diminishing of human potential. But I think as a designer, and that's why I'm such an advocate of design, I think I responded to the opportunity. I said, boss, there has to be a better way. This just can't be it. So rather than receive this information and data points of schooling by saying, this is the way it's always been, what can one person do? I turned out fine. Why are we complaining? I think I didn't even bother with that. I just said there has to be a better way. And I was willing to take a chance on that and say, okay, let me try it. And that's really pretty much how Riverside started, and you came to me like a little baby. Yes.
Yeah, so talking about things that happened in the past, Riverside recently marked its 20th anniversary.
It's a woohoo time. It's a woohoo. Yes.
Exactly. And with many, many more to come, I'm sure. And so before we begin talking about the future and how we can take it forward, I would like to know about some of the challenges you faced to get to this point. Obviously, Riverside is what my mom would often call a concept school. And it must have taken some time to sort of break into what was already such a rigid system, and to tell people that, what I'm doing here is worth investing time into. It's worth something that will accomplish greater things later on. So just whatever challenges or some key points that stick out.
In all fairness and all honesty, I wasn't trying to convince anybody. I did not come from education, right? So I didn't really have the wherewithal to convince somebody that what I was doing pretty much had merit. So for me, what I was absolutely convinced was that the child has to be a co-designer of the journey. That was a given. I mean, for most education, children are incidental. Their voices are incidental to the learning program, right? They never have a say. And coming from a design background, I would attribute a lot of that education to fundamentally reach the user and get the user into this journey. And that, I think, was where the courage came from. The user for us was not the parent. It was not appeasing the parent or pleasing the parent. Because I remember right off the cuff, a lot of people who took admission in the first said, "Aap exams nahi dete ho? You are not giving tests. You are not teaching 12 nursery rhymes," because that was what was understood. So it didn't bother me, right? So I have to say the fact that there was such a clear focus on the user really blinkered us to the noise of pressure. It just didn't bother me. Still doesn't bother me, but even then it didn't bother me. And so the challenges were not so much of what did I have to do to convince, because frankly, in all fairness, the story itself started gaining momentum. I mean, literally, if you see a child, you walk into Riverside and I don't have to convince anybody, right? The children are they demonstrate that confidence, the idea of inviting people into their stories rather than, keeping them away. So those were not the challenges. I think, frankly, I'm not a fan of challenges. I don't think all of us go through that. So it really is not something I've spent too much time on. Failure, to not at all. I don't think there's a word called failure that one must even give any weight to, because it's such a social construct. But yes, I think the iteration, the continuous focus on the user, and building a team that believes that, I think that was where the fun was. I mean, you met this ridiculously talented, brilliant team, right? And I have to say, we're not the smartest people on the planet. We're not the PhDs of the world. But I cannot tell you how powerful a collective will is. when you have a group of people who have that collective purpose, which is common and unrelenting and fierce, then it's magic. So I believe the biggest, not challenge, but the biggest opportunity was to continue to find those people who believe in the idea long enough and strong enough. And I think that's what Riverside has spent 20 years doing more than anything else. And then, of course, the beneficiary is always the child. And then eventually, of course, the parent becomes your secondary stakeholder, but they become partners in when they see the amount of faith and respect and joy the adults have in their children. I mean, in their children. Half the time they don't have the same joy in their own children. And then you find, group of people say, no, we trust your kids and they're fantastic and we should champion them. Yeah, so that's been quite a journey for 20 years.
Brilliant. I think that segues very well into our next question, because like you said, a lot of the time was spent in creating this sort of curriculum where we were at the center of it as students. And this next question is directly from the team at Cato themselves, and is in particular about the curriculum we follow. Because, when I was talking to them, they're like, this is how I learned. And they were like, really? So, firstly, what intention was it created with? And how does it help us move away from that sort of marks-based education you spoke about at the very beginning?
Well, it's wonderful that you're asking this question now as a graduate from a space where you might not even have known how those seeds got planted, right? That's the beauty of what one would say a full and competent and empowering curriculum is. So if I would have just put you as a framework, and I keep calling it the humane framework because that's really what it is, it starts with a promise. And the promise is that every child will graduate as humane citizens with an I-CAN mindset. It's great. It sounds fantastic. But then it has to come down into actions, right? So that value proposition is distilled through our design thinking fits framework. And that's really where I believe our distinguishing or disrupting sort of framework is. It's putting those values through a design thinking framework of intentionality to create our processes that we have all got, whether it's conglomerate, agenda setting, insane, all of the processes, the myriad processes, each of them having one of those values. And that, by the way, can still be left without as a great idea. It finally resides in a timetable. And the timetable becomes your artifact. It's your conscience. So when you look at our timetable, it is not just timetabling for subjects, right? It's not that. It is timetabling for content, character, and culture. So if you see it, there will be a parent piece that is happening. There will be a process that is happening. There will be a challenge that is happening. All of that finally becomes that artifact of conscience. It is where the intention gets put into action that results in the impact of you as citizens graduating. And that's been, I think, the work that we have done for 20 years. How do you refine that timetable? How do you ensure that the values are alive in that timetable, whether it is artists in residence that requires time and space? Because often the constant refrain I've heard from most schools is time kahan hai? Where is the time? I would rather do 5 periods of math, but 1 of character or 1 of conscience, right? So I believe that it's not an either or, it is a both and you can build children with passion and compassion. And we've seen it with all of you alumni walking out. So I think the timetabling becomes reflective of the kind of curriculum that we have created over time. Of course, we sit for the CIE, but that's right at the end. I don't have to be bothered by that when my child walks in. Again, most schools worry about that. They say, I'm a CBSE school or I'm an ICSE school, so from grade 1, bichara, the poor child walks into a textbook-oriented program, which I keep wanting to give that courage back to schools and back to leaders to say, no, you are the bridge or the barrier between what will finally happen in the timetable, because all the intention in the world doesn't change it if it is not timetable. So we've really changed the definition of a timetable from being a boring, set of subjects or periods to this real artifact of conscience. I think that's really been a great gift to the world and to you.
Yeah, but like I just want to play the devil's advocate here for a minute and talk about this other side. So unfortunately, we still live in a world where you do need that sort of, you need your marks, you need your grades, you need your report card in order to sort of move on beyond, like a sort of baseline qualification, if you will. And that is mostly for all these what you would call hard skills, so your math, your English, your um, I don't know, science, commerce, whatever. So, and this is just a question, just something to think about. Do you think we could come up with something that's not marks based, like an evaluation criteria that doesn't have an objective component to it, and for these type of skills, for your day, like your hard skills? And if so, what would it look like?
I'll tell you something, that there is merit in disciplinary thinking. Okay, don't get me wrong. Just because there's not enough focus on what we will call life skills. I don't like to call them the soft skills, but there's an equal merit in deep disciplinary thinking, right? And that's one of the things that I find that over time we've just gotten better with. We've got the kids graduating and going to pure sciences and engineering, all of that as well. And along with, of course, the visual arts or theater or pilot. And we've got a myriad professions and a myriad passions that we have evoked and unleashed in our children. The thing with evaluation, this has been a long argument and a long challenge, is that at scale, and that's where the greatest challenge is, our scale. We have 330 million children going to school in India. That's the whole population of the United States of America, if you please, right? And the latest data was so discouraging. It says that from 330 million, only 18 million graduate college. And from that, 78 to 80% have unemployable skills. Now look at what a nation of children with graduates with unemployed skills is. It's a massive weight on a nation's conscience first. Secondly, look at the amount of cynicism, anger that you have as young adults. Where do they go? I've spent 15 years, I've gone to a college and I still can't get a job. Now, what does that mean, right? And therefore, there is a requirement in some way to have some threshold, like you said. What is your threshold? How do you ensure that there are some skill sets that are across the board, that are non-negotiable, right? Now, one can always do away with evaluation, say as long as a child can present or perform under pressure or with unfamiliar material, that should be fine enough. But you're assuming that a lot of that metrics has got a certain quality across the board. And that is our biggest challenge. In India, education is a state-run subject. So every state has its own unique dimensions and own unique challenges. So I think, can we do a better job of what we evaluate? Yes. I think, can we add elements to the plurality of a child's identity? We must most certainly. I think till such time there is a certain base threshold of skill sets, we will have to still affect this. But I think, I say give another 10 years, I don't even think children will be going to a school like we know it. I mean, COVID itself has given us a complete wake-up call to what is possible online and what we should not be wasting children's time in school with. So let's see.
Yeah, it was definitely something I wanted to ask you about, because I've been reading a lot of like opinion pieces from all these thinkers in the education space, and what kept coming out is that the pandemic has greatly impacted all sectors of our life and the way we do a number of things, but it has had a really profound effect on the way we look at work and commute and education as a whole. So one, how do you think education will change? And secondly, what do you think the new purpose of schooling will become? Because we've already learned that Khan Academy or just peer-to-peer tutoring or just looking through a textbook at home will give you the sort of skills that you need to pass your exams. You can do that on your own. What do you go to school for?
I think that's a great question. I think we always knew that school was not meant to teach children what they can learn by themselves, right? And unfortunately, we never veered away from that, always believing that not now, maybe tomorrow, not now. I think COVID has given us the confidence, I think, that yes, children can learn many things by themselves. But I think learning about yourself, you need to have each other. I think that's where the big distinction is. So whilst the Khan Academies and lots of the other apps can help you get the skill sets that you need in terms of knowledge and content, I feel so much of the bit of values and ethics and compassion, all that can only happen when you are with another. And it's in that you learn about yourself. So I would like to believe that since so much of the focus has been on social emotional well-being, especially of children across, because of the pandemic, if we don't really big time change the purpose and say that the purpose of education or school, whatever that form might be, is really to get each other to realize that we are only better when we are together, and that we have skills that will solve problems, and that the solutions must be for the greater good. You know, the larger big stories of why we exist. And it is not for extraction and consumption alone. It is to give back, it is to invest, it is to nourish, it is to thrive. So all of these will become the words that education will be shaped around. Not studying and not passing exams. Those will really be pushed to the background. Right? I think thriving, humanity, solutions. These are the new narrative. This is the new narrative around which education should, if not already, be looking at.
And that is something that we hope will come with time and with realization. I just want to backtrack here for a little bit. And you spoke about how in India, each state has its own way of teaching, and how till we get that sort of core curriculum in place or a core baseline, we won't be able to move forward. And I want to touch base with design for change over here. So with design for change, you were essentially able to take the design thinking process, feel, imagine, do, share, and make it widely available on a global scale. Can we do something similar for some of the more traditional aspects of the teaching curriculum? Would that be something that's beneficial, or is generalizability a flaw in the system?
No. I think if we go back to the example of Khan, he's done exactly that. I mean, he's made content available across the board, free. In fact, just recently, I'm aware that he is looking at even entering into the space of sciences and languages. So I think we have a lot of work that EdTech has done. I think through EdTech, we've really been able to see so many apps and programs and tools that has democratized that knowledge, right? You really don't, it's fairly now available, a click away. Of course, what EdTech has also highlighted is inequity, right? The whole idea of certain children having access to technology and certain don't, and that's just widened the gap. So till we don't realize, so that's why it comes back to the state that whilst you might talk about online and everything, boss, only 8% of our kids have access to uninterrupted Wi-Fi. Now think about that. Only 8% of the children that are going to school in India. How do you claim to think it's going to go online? How do you widen the gap, which already exists? So unless you don't have human-centric solutions and humane solutions for this, we just keep doing this in little bits and pieces. There will be those who have access anyway, like somebody like you here. You wouldn't even need to wait for something. You can do it on your own and all of that, right? But just so many children, even for our RT children that we did, we had to think so much through how do we ensure they have data. So data cards were given, what kind of devices and gadgets do they need. even despite that, there was such a struggle. So we had to kind of look even further and say, how do we create little mini hubs at Sadar Bazaar? And how do we get you as buddies to invest in, right? All of that. But imagine doing it at scale. Was as you know, so there are real challenges, and of course, the government has a lot of things like radio and online books, and they have various other programs that they've created which have allowed the reach. But quality is a very different story than just accessibility. So whilst I would say we've achieved, I believe, 100% access to education, universal what they call education, we have done nothing towards quality. And that is where I think the next 10 years have to be put specifically in quality. But COVID has really pushed multiple movements aside. I mean, now so many of the young girls have gotten married. Early marriage has been a massive problem because there's no school. Children who've gone back to villages might not even come back because of the fact that so many people have lost jobs. I mean, the next, I would say 5 years is going to be a huge struggle. So whatever shift we did till now, I think has had a massive speed breaker. And I think we'll have to kind of relook at what going forward is. So
I think more than a speed breaker, it's become a backtracker, because it's just inequity in education is just widened so much more, because at us, we who have resources, we haven't really skipped our track. We're still like on that path. Minor inconveniences, sure, but like on a more major level, definitely not. But as soon as you don't have things that you really need to sort of stay on that track, you start to fall behind. And the longer this pandemic goes on, it will just continue exacerbating.
Anyway, let's go on.
Yeah. And so this is a question we ask all of our guests. This is the sort of crux of what this podcast is centered around. And depending on what your personal on-ground experiences, the responses change, and it's wonderful to hear them. So what are some flaws that exist currently in the way we think about education as a society?
Well, there are 3 flaws. One is age, gender, and demographics. You are too young, not now, tomorrow. You're a girl or a boy. Or demographics. You're from this spectrum or that spectrum. These, I would not call them flaws, these are filters. The moment these filters come into your mind, then that mindset towards children changes big time. And depending on where you are, whether globally or geographically, it really takes another level. So I've seen that the idea of age, and we factor in age as a big deterrent in education. So these are the 3 filters. And then, of course, time, or the perception of time. There is no time. Where is the time? We're wasting time. Time, that variable of time, is big, it just completely is again a mindset shift. So I think our mindset towards our children and to their potentials and to their belief systems is where we have really, I think, compromised who our children are. And I've said this 100 times on all various podcasts, but not only podcasts, but this thing, but that, I mean, the self-evident truth is in the first 2 years of our child's life on the planet, we've seen it. Okay, from a little blob that doesn't move to in 2 years, walking, running, laughing, speaking. 2 years, first 2 years of everything that they do, they show us in the first 2 years. And then what do? We send them to school and say, no, keep quiet for the next 15 years. Now you imagine, right? Now you imagine what disservice we've done. Just when a child is amazing and the potential and the belief systems there, we kind of compromise. So I think that has been our greatest misstep and issues in education. Yeah.
All right, then that's all I had. I mean, of course, once you get into it, you could go on and on and on about it. So if you have any closing words, closing thoughts, or anything.
No, I think when I started, when I told you, the only thing I've learned in over the years is there is no tomorrow. Everything happens today. So I would encourage whoever's listening, I would encourage all of you, choose today to be a little kinder, a little bit of, more joyful, a little bit of healing. So just and this is so much more true today than every other time that we've seen. Just look at the news, switch on the news, and the only thing you hear is despair, right? So pick up the phone, call up somebody, say hi. Don't wait till tomorrow. You might never not even have it. So choose to do that today. Yeah.
Yep.
Bye. Stay safe, stay well, and get vaccinated. Who would have thought? And who would have thought that stay negative is a good word? Be negative.
Yes.
Only be negative. What a horrible way to live life.
Fail the test.
No. Yes, fail the test. Be negative. What is this nonsense? Chal. Bye. Yeah. Thank you
so much.